Welcome back, class. Let's just talk briefly about regeneration and repair. Um, when there is damage, you have to ask yourself, well, is the damage located in the central neural system or is the damage in the peripheral neural system? If the damage is in here in the peripheral neural system, then regeneration can take place. But if the damage is in the brain and in the spinal cord, somewhere in the central neural system, then regeneration and repair is not possible. Okay. So CNS, no repairs are possible. In the peripheral neural system, it can repair. Now, the beauty of the neural system is that plasticity or neuroplasticity is maintained through life. This is why we can learn. We can learn new things. We can learn new tasks. We may not be quite, good at something the first time we're doing it or very coordinated the first time we do it, but the more you do it, the more coordinated you become. Think of a baby. When a baby first puts his or her hand in their mouth, that hand is shaking, right? Everything, their head is shaking, their hands are shaking, almost like a Parkinson's disease, right? Because in a baby, the neural system hasn't fully formed and they're going through neuroplasticity. And the more they do it over and over, they lay down these neural networks that tell their brain and body of what movements are required. In Parkinson's, there's the breakdown of those neural pathways. So neuroplasticity, thank goodness, is when you're young and healthy, and even as you get older, this is why it's so important to always move your body, always stimulate your brain, stimulate your mind, take on new tasks, learn new things so that you can sprout new dendrites and synthesize new proteins and create healthy synapses between neurons. There are drugs that people take, and my goodness, there are medications and drugs that people take for pain that are really, really powerful that actually block this. It blocks the neuroplasticity, and people say they just don't feel like themselves. They feel dumb. They don't feel like they can process information. It's because many of the drugs that they take for their pain, for their anxiety, for their mental instabilities can sometimes block neuroplasticity. So it's like there's no one home. There's no expression. They can't learn anything new. They just feel so disconnected. Neuroplasticity is the ability of the neural system to adapt, to grow, to learn new things. Always stimulate the brain. As people get older, take classes, watch videos, test yourself, quiz yourself. This is why you see sometimes older people that are retired, they're sitting at the park and they're just doing word searches. They're just trying to create some sort of stimulation in their brain to do something. In order for neuroplasticity and for healthy neurons to live, you need stimulus like movement, like learning new things. You need fuel like food and glucose, and then you need oxygen. If you deprive the body of stimulation, of fuel and oxygen, the brain and the neurons start to break down and die. So you always want movement, stimulation, learning, motion, food, glucose, fats, oxygen, good healthy breathing for a healthy neural system. When parts of the brain break down, those parts in the central neural system, they're dead. But you can, through physical therapy and through neuromuscular rehabilitation, you can move in particular ways and relearn things and you can sprout new dendrites in other areas of the brain that can compensate for damaged parts of the brain. That's the beauty of this. This is where functional neurology comes into play, is to try and find creative new ways to tap into different parts of the brain that may be degenerating, to stimulate them to prevent further demise of those body parts, and to create new neural networks to compensate for the ones that aren't working very well. Okay. So the formation of new neurons from stem cells was not thought to occur in humans. But in 1992, growth factors were found that stimulates adult mice brain cells to multiply. In 1998, there were new neurons found to form within the adult hippocampus. And this means that this supports neuroplasticity. This is really important for learning. The hippocampus is important for learning, for remembering things, for your memory. The factors that prevent neurogenesis within the central neural system is inhibition by neuroglial cells, the absence of growth factors, and the lack of neurolemmas and scar formation. Those are different things that can prevent regeneration and repair in the central neural system, but make it possible in the peripheral neural system. We did speak about certain autoimmune conditions, one being MS, which is the destruction of the myelin sheath within the central neural system. It can happen in the peripheral neural system as well. In the central neural system, it affects the oligodendrocytes, and in the peripheral neural system, it's the Schwann cells, right? It's when the sheets become scars or they become more plaques instead of that healthy fat and cholesterol. It affects somewhere around 500,000 people in the US. It appears between the ages of 20 and 40, twice as often in females than males, and it mimics a B12 deficiency. When you look up B12 deficiency, it'll look just like MS, right? B12 is needed for methylation, and it's needed to form the myelin sheaths. So it's really important, not just for B12, but usually B6, B9, and B12 all work together. B6, B9, and B12. B9 is what people call folate or folic acid. 6 is pyridoxine, and 12 is cobalamin. So some of the symptoms include muscle weakness, motor weakness, visual disturbances, abnormal sensations, and MS can go into remission for almost a decade. So for 10 years, a person can have no symptoms at all. It can relapse, but it typically results in progression. Once their body is under stress, it progresses in dominoes, and until there's like a real severe cumulative loss of function. Epilepsy, this is also a second most common neurological disorder. This is what people call like seizures or epileptic seizures. Very common in children. It's actually been quite common after COVID in young kids. It affects about 1% of the population, and it's characterized by short current attacks of these uncontrolled electrical discharges that occur in the brain. And certain things can trigger it, like lights, flashing lights, or loud noises, and even certain smells can trigger it. And then the skeletal muscles contract involuntarily, and people can have a loss of consciousness in this. And some of the causes can happen at birth. There could be some sort of brain damage at birth. There could be some metabolic disturbances also within the brain. There are infections that cause it, toxins that cause it, vascular disturbances, poor blood flow, decreased oxygen, decreased glucose. Infections, I said we've seen an increase in this after COVID. So this could be viral or bacterial infections, or simple sort of TBI, like a traumatic brain injury. A TBI stands for traumatic brain injury. Head injuries and tumors can also cause this. So, electrical conduction and discharges, right? It's really important for the brain to send out signals down the spinal cord to come out to nerves, and then those nerves feed your organs, right? Like the heart or the stomach or, skeletal muscles. And when there is an interference in the transmission of the impulses from the brain, right, when those mental impulses go down the spinal cord out to a spinal nerve to the organs, that's great. That's good, healthy function. But you can have like a misalignment. You can have a misaligned vertebrae putting pressure on the nerve. You can have a disc that puts pressure on a nerve. You can have a bone spur, or you can have arthritis, which have bone spurs putting pressure on a nerve. You can have a scoliosis putting pressure on a nerve. You can have muscle spasms putting pressure on nerves. All of those create different degrees of subluxation, which all means there's just nerve interference. And if you have the weight, let's say you have a subtle misalignment, there's PhDs that have done research on this. They say that the weight of a quarter on a nerve root reduces the impulses by 60%. So that means only 40% of the impulses are getting to the cells, tissues, and organs of the body. When you don't have 100% of nerve flow going from brain down spinal cord to nerves and to organs, then the organs don't function the way they do. The systems don't function the way they do. Your immune system becomes weaker. Your overall health becomes compromised. That's from lack of neurological flow, okay? Or nerve interference or subluxation complex, blocking signals from the brain down the spinal cord out to different cells, tissues, and organs of the body. Okay, and this is just your overview of the dendrites, and the dendrites are receiving the stimulus through activation of those chemically or mechanically gated ion channels. In sensory neurons, they produce generator or receptor potentials. In motor neurons, there's the association neurons, they produce your EPSPs or your IPSPs, your excitatory postsynaptic potentials or your inhibitory postsynaptic potentials. Then the cell body receives the stimulus and produces the EPSPs and the IPSPs, and it's going to send that down the axon right after it leaves the axon hillock. It's going to propagate or conduct the nerve impulse down through the axon, and when it's myelinated, we have that saltatory conduction. That's if it's myelinated, right, by those little Schwann cells here, and you have the leaping of the conductions till it gets to the very end of the axon terminal, where you have the end bulbs that have the neurotransmitters. And then you have the influx of calcium that rushes in, tells the neurotransmitters to be released, and it crosses from the presynaptic to a postsynaptic membrane. And then depending on the neurotransmitter that crosses, again, it can create another excitatory postsynaptic potential or an inhibitory postsynaptic potential. If we depolarize, it's an excitatory postsynaptic potential. And if you repolarize or hyperpolarize, then it's an inhibitory postsynaptic potential. Remember, hyperpolarization is when you're moving further away in a more negative direction, away from resting membrane potential.